I think I'm going to add a, let's see, what's the alternative to use this gray and some black. I think I want to go for this. I'm starting somewhere here, just so that I don't ruin this gradient right away. And I'm just going to put some more or less random shapes on there. And ideally they are covering everything and not looking like coffee staining. Which means they are going to need a second pass. And it's actually not that much darker than this area up here, so that's quite interesting. He's axing himself, why oh why? Yeah, so I think I want to go for a slightly more, like almost like a zebra, maybe like elongated shapes instead. I think that fits a bit better. think we can go for a few lighter dots in between to make the pattern more interesting. And as the paint dries and gets less and less, you want to go back and mix some more, because it's usually better or easier to paint freehands with fresh paint, where you're not scraping off the last bits of pigment. Okay, this side needs a bit more of the smaller elements, I think. So switching between round round objects and shapes, and then sometimes painting straighter edges seems like the way to go here. Mustn't forget the edges, because if it suddenly just stops, if the pattern just suddenly stops, then that will just look odd. Okay, so the question is, do we go even darker, or do we apply some lighter variations here? I think we can try both. Might just start straightforward with some lighter gray here. It's a bit of a blue variation. It's Arctic blue, so that should look interesting. Maybe start back here. And kind of stick with the pattern. Just adding smaller elements here. Okay, this needs a second pass, definitely. Yeah, I think I'm going to try and get that color consistency sharper. Okay, that should cover better. So using thicker paint gives more interesting results actually, because you leave a blob of paint with sharp edges, and that's basically how camouflage looks. I think I'm going to have to apply just a filter on top of that because it's really intense. So after I put down all the patterns, what I'm going to do is going to take some color. I haven't really decided on what yet, and then just go over the whole thing, and that way we can also shade some certain areas again. That should be darker, and it should also take away from how intense the last step here looks. But overall, I quite like the results. I just kind of decided that I want a yeah, brownish, well, the thing that turned out a bit pink, but that was going to be my base coat or base tone, and then I just knew I wanted a darker and a lighter yeah, just pattern on top of that. I mean, obviously I was looking at certain, or at digital camo and how they look, but in the end it was just going with the flow. Okay, we definitely have to work on some edges here just to frame everything a bit better, because now yeah, the light elements of the camouflage are the most intense pattern, or the most intense element. So I'll go and work on those edges now. And again, for the overall light situation, I'm going to go back in and work with some controlled washes and glazes. just something that I can't really do, and I don't know how to fix that since forever, is how do you apply a dot of color that's not looking super inhomogeneous. I just want to put down a dot of color and then have it dry super regular. It's just not working. But yeah, the next step of just applying a wash is aimed to do exactly that. Need to figure out or decide what I want to use. It's camouflage, but again, it's it's always a trade-off between, do I just go for exactly how it looks in reality, or do I just add a bit of, my own twist to it? Yeah, I think adding more of those in between smaller dots with a bit more of a muted color kind of works. So I'm guessing it's going to be overall a little too dark. But we'll see. I am looking for a wash. Oh, I see why I couldn't find it. Because it's not actually a Games Workshop ink. It's a game coloring. That explains. But yeah, I'll try one wash with sepia, and then we are going to see if that fits the overall color scheme. Yeah, and if we might have to switch it up. I'm just going to change my painting water because it's like that, and that's going to influence washes. Okay, so this is rather intense. Going to take some black. There's a bit of gray in there too. And toning that down, but a bit of brown I actually don't mind. So let's see, and I'm going to cover all of it once and just having most of it accumulate where we were actually shading it. So I'm just going to go over this slightly, because this is going to be or should be on our lightest area. I'm pushing the pigments up to where we shaded before. So this is going to be applying a filter, and hopefully it's going to draw everything together. Okay, so one thing that I also want to do, I might as well do it with this color. I'm just going to tone down these sides of those plates. Needs more intense color. We added a lot of that black by scale color, and the whole thing should not be too shiny and not end up too shiny. I mean, the pattern looks interesting, right? It's just not what it originally started out as. Going to also apply those filters here to darken these areas. And slightly tint them. Put some coffee staining here. It's always a good idea to just focus on one area and leave it to dry and watch it. Yeah, so intensity is good here. Overall, plates. Plates are getting rather dark. I think I'll bring back out some of the edges. But overall, I'm not too worried about this because I want to paint an orange marking on top of that anyway. So just reframing the whole thing. Actually, I don't think it looks that bad. Just not 100% happy with how the camo is turning out. But then again, yeah, not too bad. It's just the 3 colors are kind of solid. Yeah, kind of like it. It's not what I planned, but still, I'll take it. Alright, so I think I want to try and start painting those markings. So I just want to figure out how I'm going to do that. Either way, I think I'm going to start just doing that, the V shape here. There's multiple approaches that we can take here. Like put on some medium, some liquid mask. Just dab that on with a sponge and then paint the the marking over and then rub it off. Let's see. I'm gonna need a blister sponge for that. So probably where's my pliers? I can't find them, but I have some others here. Yeah, I'm just going to get rid of some of the bulk of the sponge so that it just has a few filaments left. So that we can, so that we can apply, not as much medium as we would if we were just to dab all of that in. Usually gives a better pattern because you don't want to leave like a huge blob of that medium. You want it to sort of fade out like it's a scratch that was responsible for getting rid of that marking. Still good. It's not that old. So do like this. And you can see that it leaves some interesting patterns. It just might be a tiny bit too thick for my tastes. Let's get rid of some of it. And that's what I mean with just leaving round patterns, because a scratch is usually not going to be round. It's going to be, like I said, with an edge or with edges. This is looking better. Let's see. Might as well try it. Also changing orientation. I'm putting it more on the edges, towards the edges, and then in the middle not that much of a rub off. Now we have to leave this to dry. Just going to let it dry for a moment here. Actually, we might as well just do the other side too, so we don't have to wait for it to dry again. Okay. Maybe also towards the bottom a bit more. So when we do this V shape, you might do just an extension of that V. Yeah, we're going to see how it looks after we tried it the first time. So adding more intensity. And going for spots and not really a finish that's equally covering. Just on the upper edge. And as we move lower, I'm going to fade it out a bit. Going to apply one more layer, and I think I'm going to add some white at least. Okay, so let's add some pure orange as the next step. And then add some white to make it look a bit more faded. And then we have to hope that the what's it called? The medium just comes off and leaves some interesting scratches. Okay, add some white. Carefully just trying that. Don't want to overdo it. Yeah, that should work out. Okay. New hosts. Hey gosh dongles. Thanks for the hosts. Hey Art of Mike Disney. Oh, beautiful voice, okay. My lord, that's beautiful. Thanks. Guys, don't forget to request songs. We are repeating again. So I have found color shapers to work pretty good with that, with rubbing this off without the added fat that we have in our fingers. So let's try that. Okay, you can see that most of it comes off quite easy. Not really sure if I like the patterns. Just getting rid of all the masking medium. Yeah, I think it's maybe a better idea to use that on larger areas, because here it's not that big of a deal to try to control that. Yeah, that's not really a super satisfying effect. Yeah, so that doesn't really look the way I wanted it to, but trying to fix that a bit. Let's try to get some sharper edges in some areas at least. Okay, just fixing some of that orange, making it more intense. Something's wrong with the lighting. Yeah, so again, I'm not too happy with how the pattern looks. But not much we can do at the moment because we also didn't really apply a thin layer. It's a few thick layers, so getting rid of that is probably not going to work. Because we're not really happy with this side, I'm going to try and get rid of the masking medium over here. I still feel for small areas it's better to just paint it on the way you want it to. I guess the randomization that this stuff gives you is good for larger scales or larger areas in general. But here it doesn't help all that much. Okay, that should be everything. Right, so here again I'm going to start with a darker orange. We want it to come down here. And how far up is it here? Start here maybe. And just apply some layers of paint. Not too diluted. Just framing that shape. And leaving some areas out. So like these edges here, they're probably scratched off. Actually, I think the more muted color does look better. Who would have guessed? Let's see, can we tone that down a bit again? Also, it's probably better to, in regards to it still being a camouflage pattern, not to have that orange be too much in your face. So just applying that with a spotty finish. And having a focus on edges that face up. I'm going to just paint a few light dots, so elements where light would gather and catch on. So do that over here. Going to give this a second pass too. Still a tiny a bit too intense. Yeah, I think that's a good trade-off between intensity and looking somewhat muted. Okay, so looks like most of it is rubbed off. And again, just want to have some highlights in there, so I'm going to mix in white straight away. All these edges where paint rubbed off and that are looking or facing up, I'm going to put some highlight dots on, and there we can also paint like a scratch line here maybe. And then just do the same over here. Focus on this edge and then drag it further into the orange and try to simulate that, something just dragged over there maybe. And all the other spots where color is missing. And then maybe another scratch here, and here's some color missing. So just overall trying to go for something that looks really battered and rubbed off. Can mix a bit of orange in if it's too white for your taste. Okay, and I think I'm going to go for a few orange just features in there that are more intense. Maybe this little part here, just bordered by the scratch. Do the same over here. Maybe this lower half is more intense than the upper half. Just to mix it up a bit. That 80s music. Okay, so I'm hoping this is subtle enough. I'm not 100% satisfied with how it looks on camera, but I don't know how to fix that. Looks like an interesting color dot or color aspect. that and leave most of that part without camo, so that we can concentrate on or focus on just chipping and stuff like that. And the idea behind using chipping medium is always that you can see the surface tension is really large, and that leaves some interesting patterns. So let's see. Okay, so using some of that chipping medium, and I'm going to mix in a bit black, and this is going to retain most of its properties, namely the surface tension that I mentioned, but I want a bit darker, but still with good coverage, and I'm going to focus on these parts that are going to be chipped, and just gently dabbing the brush along there, trying not to overdo it. And you can also use the sponge method for that, but I'm just not really a fan of it, because I feel like my control is really limited doing that. Well, also coming up here a bit. I'm just starting by touching the very edge on most of the length, also works, and then intensifying some parts. And yeah, I would really recommend to try to start out as small and thin as possible, because it's a really tiny scale, and you just want to have the, unless you're going for some super intense weathering, of course, yeah, you just want some subtle edge distortions, and then if you feel like, okay, that's not enough, you can always go back. But as you can see, for example here, this adds a subtle hint of realism, and that's actually enough, and it doesn't cover most of the edge highlighting. You still have some of the edge highlighting left. Yeah, but you still have a scratched edge and scratched corners. And then, like I said, if you don't feel like it's enough, you can still put in some, for example here, let's put some wider scratches in. So I would suggest letting the chipping paint dry in a bit on the brush, so it really doesn't flow off too much. Okay, let's put some more on this corner, for example. And And as the paint dries, you see that you can add some interesting patterns. It's more like not a scratch that looks like a line that is painted, but more like interrupted patterns. Here, for example, you can see that, and that's what you want to achieve. Okay, so with that dried brush, I'm going to wipe a few strokes across the surfaces and adding some additional detail. And this is already really dark. It works a lot better on stuff like that, for example, so you can see. For example, here. Okay, that's already a bit too dry. So now you just have to prepare your color again. It's still too much. Okay, go for a bit of a thicker finish here. Okay, I didn't want to do that, but it doesn't look that bad, so we're going to leave that. And obviously you're going to aim for these areas that are going to, or that are next to maybe moving plates. Or just moving parts in general. Or that, these areas would probably, since they're the most exposed, they would get some chipping to, but I first want to warm up my hand a bit more before I work on these sensitive areas, if you know what I mean. Areas that are more prominent, so for example here, it's not going to be the focus of the miniature, it's adding a bit of detail, but since this area there's a lot of just bright colors, if I just go there and paint a scratch that I don't like, then I'm gonna hate myself forever. Okay, and as the brush dries, like I said, you can take advantage of that and vary the way that it applies color. Let's see, maybe drag it over here and leave a bit of just the tiniest speck of color is going to stick. But yeah, so after doing this, you could leave it like that, and especially if you are like a scale modeler, you would probably leave it like that. But since we're doing miniatures, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus a bit on those scratches again, and I'm going to add some light reflections just below the edges or the scratches to increase contrast again a bit more. Actually, I'm gonna do some black lining here with the chipping medium, since we will have some paint coming off there anyway, and we might as well do it with this color, so to have these places be even darker. Because since we can't really implement any more light without redoing the whole thing, it's always a good idea to go darker to increase contrast. So yeah, right now I wish I took into consideration that I might just apply filter to bring everything together a bit more when I started, and I think overall I should have started a bit lighter on the shoulders, but it's okay, especially when looking at it like this. I'm not too worried that it's too dark, but overall I would have probably started lighter, that's for sure. Okay, so for example here, that's definitely an area where I'm going to add some white. Let's see how that looks. Okay, this adds just a tiny bit of light that's caught here. Looks quite interesting. And let's find another edge. For example here, this is probably going to... Oh, okay, didn't want to do that. It's going to catch some light. Maybe do the same here. Just finding a few areas that would benefit from increased contrast next to those chips. Yeah, I don't want to overdo it, but for example here, there's going to be some paint that's going to be dug into really deep. Okay, so yeah, I think we'll leave the shoulder pads at that. Again, they turned out a bit darker than I expected, but since it's a rather dark, well, dirty model in the end, it's kind of okay, I guess. But yeah, if you wanted to have a lighter result, especially when you are going to apply filters like I did, yeah, it's a good idea to start lighter. Yeah, you know that I usually just try something new and then adjust on the fly. And if it doesn't turn out the way 100% the way I wanted it to, then I just take it as a learning experience. But again, it's not really ruined or anything, it just looks different than I expected it. Okay, and yeah, so next I'm probably going to work on this, as it's still, even though we did apply some scratches already, still looks rather clean. And yeah, we're going to try to bring that in line with the rest.